The heart of Manhattan, a symphony of noise and light, fell unnaturally silent. The usual cacophony of honking horns, chattering crowds, and the hum of neon lights was replaced by an eerie stillness that blanketed the city. It was not the silence of a power outage, nor the quiet after a storm. This was different. It was a silence that seemed to seep into the very bones of the city, a silence that carried with it a weight of something unknown and unsettling. This was the silence of disbelief, of shared bewilderment, that descended upon the city on a night that would forever be etched in its memory. People stood in the streets, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of emergency lights, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The night of the Manhattan Alien Abduction, a night when the impossible became reality, and the city that never sleeps was forced into an unnatural slumber. Thousands of New Yorkers going about their usual routines suddenly found themselves frozen in time. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been altered, leaving them suspended in a moment of sheer terror and confusion. Cars stopped mid-traffic, their engines sputtering and dying. Drivers sat behind the wheel, their hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes darting around in panic as they tried to comprehend what was happening. Lights flickered and went out, plunging the city into an eerie darkness. And then silence. A silence so deep that it seemed to swallow the city whole, leaving nothing but an unsettling void. A silence so profound, so absolute that it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. The usual hum of the city was replaced by a deafening quiet that seemed to stretch on forever. This was no ordinary blackout. This was something far stranger, far more unsettling. It was as if the city had been plunged into a different dimension, one where the rules of reality no longer applied. This was something far stranger, far more unsettling. The air was thick with an unspoken fear, a sense that something was terribly wrong. People huddled together seeking comfort in the presence of others, yet unable to shake the feeling of impending doom. As the minutes ticked by, a collective sense of dread began to creep in. Something was terribly wrong. Whispers of confusion and fear spread through the crowd, as people tried to make sense of the inexplicable events unfolding around them. Something had happened in Manhattan that defied explanation. Strange lights appeared in the sky, casting an otherworldly glow over the city. The lights moved in patterns that defied logic, leaving onlookers in a state of awe and terror. The night stretched on, each passing moment filled with a growing sense of unease. The city, usually so full of life and energy, felt like a ghost town, its streets empty and its buildings dark. The only sound was the occasional murmur of confused voices as people tried to understand what was happening. Midnight came and went, but the city remained in its unnatural state. A mysterious fog began to roll in, adding to the surreal atmosphere. It was as if Manhattan had been transported to another world, one where the normal rules of time and space no longer applied. Phones had no signal, and attempts to contact the outside world were met with silence. It was as if the city had been cut off from the rest of the world, left to face this strange phenomenon alone. As the night wore on, the sense of fear and confusion only grew. People huddled together, seeking comfort in the presence of others, yet unable to shake the feeling of impending doom. The strange lights in the sky continued to dance, casting an eerie glow over the city. The night of the Manhattan Alien Abduction would go down in history as one of the most mysterious and unsettling events the city had ever experienced. It was a night that defied explanation, a night that left an indelible mark on the collective memory of those who lived through it. As dawn approached, the strange lights began to fade, and the city slowly started to come back to life. But the memory of that night, the night the city stood still, would linger on, a reminder of the inexplicable and the unknown. The sun rose over Manhattan, casting a warm glow over the city. People emerged from their buildings, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. The city had survived the night, but the questions remained. What had happened, and why? The night of the Manhattan Alien Abduction would remain a mystery, a night that defied explanation and left a lasting impact on the city and its inhabitants. It was a night that reminded everyone of the fragility of reality and the ever-present possibility of the unknown. As the initial shock began to wear off, a chilling realization swept through the city. People were missing. It wasn't just a few isolated cases, it was a mass disappearance that left the entire city in a state of disbelief and fear. The initial confusion quickly turned into a frantic search for answers, as families and friends desperately tried to locate their loved ones, thousands of them, gone. without a trace. The sheer number of missing individuals was staggering, and the city was left grappling with an unprecedented crisis. The once bustling streets of Manhattan were now eerily quiet, as if the very soul of the city had been ripped away. The streets, once teeming with life, were now eerily deserted. Times Square, usually a hub of activity, stood empty and silent. Parks that were once filled with laughter and joy were now hauntingly quiet. The absence of people was palpable, and it cast a somber shadow over the entire city. Apartments stood empty, doors wide open as if their occupants had left in a hurry. It was as if they had vanished in the middle of their daily routines, leaving behind a trail of unfinished tasks and unanswered questions. The sight of these abandoned homes was a stark reminder of the suddenness and mystery of the disappearances. The missing were not confined to any one area or demographic. They came from every corner of the city, from the affluent neighborhoods to the more modest ones. The disappearances cut across all social and economic boundaries, affecting people from all walks of life. They were young and old, rich and poor, from all walks of life. The diversity of the missing individuals only added to the confusion and fear. It seemed that no one was safe, and the randomness of the disappearances made it impossible to predict who might be next. The only thing they seemed to have in common was their sudden, inexplicable disappearance. There were no patterns, no clues, no warnings. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a city full of unanswered questions and growing anxiety. The city that never sleeps was now a city in mourning, united in its grief and bewilderment. The authorities were overwhelmed. Candlelight vigils were held in various parts of the city as people came together to support each other and hold on to hope. The sense of community was strong, but so was the sense of loss. The police, the FBI, even the National Guard. None of them had ever encountered anything like this before. The scale of the disappearances was beyond anything they had ever dealt with, and the lack of evidence made their task even more daunting. Press conferences were held, but the authorities had little to offer in terms of answers or reassurance. The scale of the disappearances was unprecedented, the circumstances utterly baffling. Community meetings were held, but they were often filled with more questions than answers. Schools and playgrounds, once filled with the sounds of children, were now eerily silent. Investigators were left scratching their heads, unable to make sense of the situation. Theories ranged from the mundane to the outlandish, but none could fully explain the events of that night. Some believed it was a mass abduction, while others thought it might be a government experiment gone wrong. Conspiracy theorists had a field day, but in the end, no theory could provide a satisfactory explanation for the disappearances. The city was left in a state of perpetual uncertainty, waiting for answers that might never come. In the chaos and confusion, the city was a whirlwind of activity. Sirens blared, and the streets were filled with people running in every direction, their faces masks of panic and bewilderment. The once familiar landscape of Manhattan had transformed into a scene from a nightmare, with emergency vehicles weaving through the throngs of people, their lights casting eerie shadows on the buildings. Eyewitness accounts began to emerge, each one more surreal than the last. Reporters flocked to the scene, their cameras capturing the raw emotions of those who had seen the inexplicable. People spoke in hushed tones, their voices trembling as they recounted their experiences. Each story seemed more bizarre than the last, as if the city had become a stage for the unimaginable. Faces, etched with shock and disbelief, told tales that defied logic and reason. Some spoke of blinding lights in the sky, of strange humming noises that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. The lights were described as otherworldly, casting an unnatural glow over the city. There was a pervasive feeling of being watched, an unsettling sensation that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. People glanced over their shoulders, their eyes wide with fear. Others described seeing shadowy figures, tall and slender, moving with an uncanny grace. These figures seemed to glide through the darkness, their movements almost hypnotic in their fluidity. The way they moved was both mesmerizing and terrifying, as if they were not bound by the same physical laws as the rest of us. A taxi driver, caught in the heart of the blackout, claimed to have seen a group of people levitating into the air. His voice shook as he described the scene, his eyes wide with the memory of what he had witnessed. He spoke of their bodies bathed in an otherworldly light, a glow that seemed to emanate from within them. It was a sight that defied explanation, leaving him questioning his own sanity. The light was unlike anything he had ever seen, a radiant, almost ethereal glow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. A young couple, walking home from a Broadway show, swore they saw a giant, disc-shaped object hovering over the city. They described it in vivid detail, their voices overlapping as they tried to convey the sheer size and presence of the object. The object was massive, its underside ablaze with pulsating lights that seemed to dance and flicker in the night sky. It hovered silently, an ominous presence that filled them with a sense of awe and dread. The lights were mesmerizing, drawing their eyes and holding them captive. It was as if the object was alive, its lights a heartbeat that pulsed in time with their own. These accounts, though fragmented and often contradictory, painted a picture of something truly extraordinary. Each story added a piece to the puzzle, creating a mosaic of the inexplicable. The city had become a canvas for the extraordinary, a place where the impossible seemed to unfold before their very eyes. But were these accounts reliable? Or were they simply the product of fear and imagination, fueled by the darkness and uncertainty of the situation? In the absence of light, the mind can play tricks, turning shadows into monsters and lights into omens. The city, shrouded in darkness, became a breeding ground for fear and speculation. People clung to their stories, seeking comfort in the shared experience of the unknown. But as the night wore on, the line between reality and imagination began to blur, leaving them to wonder. Were they witnesses to something extraordinary, or merely dreamers lost in the night? As the days turned into weeks, the search for answers intensified. Forensic teams scoured the city for clues, but the evidence they found only deepened the mystery. Strange symbols were discovered etched into pavements, glowing faintly under UV light. Electromagnetic anomalies were detected in areas where the disappearances were concentrated. One particularly intriguing piece of evidence was a series of footprints found in Central Park. The footprints were unlike anything ever seen before, three-toed and strangely elongated, as if belonging to a creature that walked upright but possessed an entirely different skeletal structure. These tantalizing clues hinted at a truth beyond our understanding, a reality where the impossible might just be possible. But without concrete proof, without a definitive explanation, the mystery of the Manhattan alien abduction remained unsolved.